Hello, and welcome to this week's Torah Outreach Program, Erev Shabbos Burst of Inspiration. Today's Burst of Inspiration is sponsored by Mrs. Malka Leah Braunschweiger as a schus for Shlema for Chaim Yosef Aryeh ben Sarah Rezel. This week, Parshas Chayei. We have an interesting pasuk. An interesting verse in the Torah. It seems a little bit repetitive, and as we know, there's no such thing as an extra word or an extra letter in the Torah. For Avram Zaken Ba Bayomim. Avram was old, he had come into his days. Sounds like a nice expression if you're just interested in nice expressions. But the Torah isn't looking for being flamboyant. The Torah isn't looking to be poetic. The Torah is exact. So why Zaken Ba Bayomim? He was old, coming into his days. There's a fascinating medrash that when Yitzchak reached full maturity, and Avram was very, very old, they looked exactly alike. Since Yitzchak was Avram's son, and Hashem made him purposely look like Avram, so people wouldn't say he came from somewhere. They found him in the marketplace somewhere, and they adopted him. But now, as Avram developed, now he looked, as Yitzchak developed, now he looked exactly like his father. And there was no aging of his father. The Medrash says that until Avram, you reach a certain plateau of your development, and you stay that way. So that means when Yitzchak reached that plateau, and Avram had reached that plateau many, many years before, now they look alike. So Avram said to God, it's not right. There should be a feeling of respect, of deference for age, but how can anybody tell the difference if we all look the same? And God said, you're right. And Avram went to sleep that night, woke up the next morning with a head and beard that was full of white hair. And Avram said, God, what'd you do to me? And he said, wear it with pride. The white represents a sign of like an aura of godliness, a sense of purity, of knowledge. As I say today, sometimes a white beard is distinguished. Enjoy it. Just today, I was discussing this idea with a group of my senior citizens. And they said, but no one respects old age today. And I said, that's because the values in today's generation have changed drastically. Our values, no matter which way the wind's blowing, never changes. Because when your values are based on something real, like our Torah, we have the exact same value system that we've had for the last 3,000 years. I explained to my seniors that I'm probably one of the few rabbis I know that has to stand up for his students. Because if someone who is older than 70 years old, regardless of what they know, what they do with their lives, how they behave, They deserve respect for one reason: their life experiences. If they've gotten past the age of 70, they know more in certain areas of life that I don't, even though I'm the teacher. They thought that was peculiar. They liked it, but they thought it was peculiar because nobody, as they said, thinks that way today. And I said, that's because, oh, actually, I didn't say. One of them said, the values have changed. I said, yeah, you could say that 20 years ago, the values have changed. Now, it's more like there are no values. The secular world, for the most part, there's no such thing as values. No such thing as values. Respect, a sense of deference to someone because of who they are or even how old they are. When somebody comes in who looks like they need a seat because they're older, does everybody on a bus want to get up and give them a seat? Maybe if they're lucky, you'll find one or two people. Or maybe they have to make a law on certain buses. These seats are reserved for the elderly and somebody who can't stand, somebody who's crippled or disabled. 30, 40 years ago, they didn't need those laws. It was automatic. Why are there laws on buses, on public transportation? These seats are reserved for people over a certain age. Or these seats are reserved for people who have disabilities. Why is there a law like that? Because if there wasn't, no one would get up. What once was considered normal, today in some circles is considered strange. The idea that a child can't yell back at a parent or can't talk back to a parent or be rude to a teacher 20 years ago was a given. Today, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Years ago, I saw a clip. 30 years ago, people were saying, in 30 years from now, we're going to have flying cars. And there's a clip next to it. 30 years later, a guy dressed up like a cat. And he said, I identify as a cat. And if you don't agree with me, so you're a hater and a bigot. Nothing to do with a hater and a bigot. There's certain values. There's certain senses of respect, of human respect. There was an article in a paper just a few years ago. A child who wasn't being watched properly by his parents at a zoo got into the gorilla cage, got through the bars. And the gorilla would have killed that child. They had to call security, and the security had to kill the gorilla. The animal rights activists were furious. Why does the gorilla, it was the child's fault, it was the parent's fault. Why does the gorilla have to die? Really? Okay, it was the parent's fault. It was the child's fault. This is a human, this is a gorilla. We don't understand the difference here? No, we don't. People will say, you're old-fashioned. No. I have a value system that is based on something real. A Torah that was given to us and that was timeless. or that is timeless. And it teaches us the idea of respect, deference, the idea of right and wrong is not in the hands of people who can change their mind depending on which way the wind blows. Right and wrong is divine. And when you look at it that way, our value system hasn't changed in 3,000 years and never will change. With the value system of the rest of the world, it depends on which way the wind blows. So I'm trying to teach my senior citizens. They have what to be proud of because they deserve respect, if for no other reason than the Torah says that they have a life of experiences that we could look up to and we could learn from. And that's what it means to have a real value system. Shabbos.